I'm Matt Landau from VRMB, and this is Unlocked, Season 9, Home Runners. This episode features Tiffany Edwards, and there are few people on this planet who understand better how vacation rentals intersect with laws than Tiffany Edwards. She was literally raised in a vacation rental family. She's married to a vacation rental manager, and she has primary experience with lobbying, which, whether we like it or not, is one of the most obvious ways to change things in society. And this isn't to say that short-term rental change can't be done in other ways, but getting to know Tiffany over the years, I now see it as probably the most focused way to effectuate what we want, which is another important nuance. We'll get into that in the conversation. When I started out in vacation rentals myself, I didn't know anything about hospitality, and I certainly didn't know anything about regulation or advocacy or laws. But when the city delivered me a fine in the high 5-digit range and suddenly tried to shut my vacation rental business down, I became a student of this game real quick. In fact, I consider fair regulation to be the single biggest looming threat in our industry, and I'll use this opportunity to announce a new endeavor along with Minute, AirDNA, and Track, in which I, along with Dana Lubner, will be attempting to create the industry's first vacation rental advocacy scorecard. Yes, this is exactly as insane as it sounds, but we've decided to do it live on air with all the experts and challenges and jokes that we dreamed about. You can subscribe to How to Save Your Vacation Rental Business podcast, hosted by Dana Lubner now, or you can sign up to VRMB's newsletter at vrmb.com/mmm to get notified about the release of Season 3. We're very much looking forward to that. But back to Tiffany. In this interview, we talk about how to educate people, especially lawmakers, about what we do and what happens when it's done right. Also, we'll talk about how any destination short-term rental stakeholders actually have to know what they want first and to come up with a realistic, actual solution to get there before complaining that things aren't fair. And finally, my favorite part of this interview is how Tiffany puts the fun in fundraising. I'm sure I didn't invent that, but if you merge your passion to your work, you end up having lots of fun always. This episode is brought to you by Point Central, the leaders in smart home automation. And Point Central's got something exciting coming along with regards to noise. You can stop by their booth 409 at VRMA International to see what all this noise is about. Pretty cool stuff there. And Breezeway, a property care and operations platform. Breezeway will also be at VRMA. Stop by their booth 315, and tell them you listen to this podcast. They'll give you something really cool. As with each episode this season, I've asked Tiffany, what does home runner mean to you?
Home runner to me means hitting it out of the park in all aspects of high quality, everything that you do, and especially with being a very small part of seeing what the home runner is and participating. It's bringing excellence and showing the insides and outs of hard work.
Would you consider yourself a home runner?
I would always consider myself a work in progress.
But you are legitimately a home runner. You not only run a home, your household there, but you also have been in the vacation rental industry forever. For those who don't know, you share your upbringing.
Very interesting story, but my mother had no idea what she wanted to do. She knew she wanted to be a part of, business. She actually lived in Italy for a while and was an artist and realized that she didn't want to be broke for the rest of her life. So she came back to the States and went to business school, and her roommate decided to move to Destin, Florida. and worked for a developer. And my mom started out working with this developer and then decided to branch out into vacation rentals. And that was in the early 1980s. So I was 6 weeks old behind essentially a front desk. But yeah, I went through the revolution of, mailing out brochures and the first software that ever came out, and stripping beds on Sundays for turn or on Saturdays for turns. But yeah, definitely lived the life of the vacation rental world. While all my friends were having fun on the summers, we didn't get summer breaks. We just worked, which was great.
It's the great irony of our colleagues is that despite working in the vacation field, we don't ever take vacation.
Correct. Yeah. We don't, because even more so that you end up knowing someone. If you've been in the industry long enough, you end up knowing someone in every market. So and then you know this, but you get around anyone and then you start talking about work and it becomes support groups. So yeah, we don't really get those same
Mhm.
vacations.
And for anyone listening, I would highly encourage you to reach out to any other vacation rental professionals you know in other destinations, trade them nights, and go and do a little research. Tiffany, you have moved into this unique role within our industry. Share the name of your company and how you describe it to people.
Sure. So Coletta Consulting is the name of my company. Coletta is my maiden name, and wanted to definitely make sure that I had something unique and personal. I started it a couple years ago, very kind of quietly. My background is actually, obviously, grew up in the vacation rental industry, so I have a very nuanced understanding. But my background is really more so in the political field. So I've specialized in fundraising. I have worked for a majority leader, a Senate president. I've worked on a special election for a former speaker. Specialized in fundraising. Really, that's how Coletta Consulting got its start. Was after my son was very, very little, and we moved back up to the Destin area. Or started fundraising for different campaigns, for different charities, different local groups, and got involved in just different political action committees. So a couple years ago, the different groups within the vacation rental industry were looking for help on their advocacy front. And so, just as a voice of kind of the industry, I got called upon, but also understanding the ins and outs of networking within the legislative sector. Kind of came about of how my business formed. Not really on LinkedIn or anything like that, but so it's just been very slow of what I can take on and what I can't, because not every fight is winnable.
Hey, that's a good point. Why aren't you on LinkedIn?
Well, again, not every fight is winnable. I've gone in the last month or so, debated on getting back in, or maybe getting back on LinkedIn. But it's just, the problem with governmental affairs is that everything becomes an extreme battle, and it's fearful and it's scary, and there's only one of me, and I'm doing better about learning to say yes and no to the right projects. But that's probably why I'm not on LinkedIn, and I think things get a little too crazy on there.
Yeah, for sure. Same goes for a lot of social media. You give someone an inch, they take a mile. And drawing boundaries around what we offer as professionals and making sure that people aren't overstepping those boundaries, I think that's a key unlock technique. And I'm curious, with your experience in the world of fundraising, in the world of lobbying, how do you compare the amount of effort that goes in, the ROI, let's just say, into an activity like fundraising or an activity like lobbying? How do you compare that with ground up community building? Because they're at very different ends of the spectrum, but they're probably equally important in their own ways.
They definitely are equally important, and I think that you going into either side, so whether it's fundraising or lobbying, or what your fundraising is supposed to accomplish, you have to understand what your overall goals are, and to understand if it's tangible or not. So I've said this before, but so if we're fundraising, I always have to have a goal in mind. You always need to make sure, and whether if it's one event or not, you need to know what your goal is ahead of time, but spread that out over maybe the course of, a month or a couple months or a year. So don't, you may have a goal for a single event. If you don't make it, try to figure out how there's other money left out on the table. Who have you not reached out to? What are other ways that you can drum up some funds? So that's definitely achievable, but it's not achievable if you're not bringing the community in. You may only have a small group of a network, but you need to make sure that your network is wide, and that more people know about whatever the ultimate goal is of your fundraising. So those things are tangible, but in terms of actual lobbying, I think you always have to understand: did you build up a relationship? Did you build up some trust? Did you build up some humility? Did you build up the understanding that you are an educated and professional source, to an elected official, to staff? That's really the ultimate goal, because at the end of the day, you may have to compromise a little bit more than what you had originally intended. And that could be seen as success or could be seen as failure. But if you're building up a relationship with that key individual, that is ultimately success, because 3 months down the road, a year down the road, that individual could be higher up in elected, office. They could be the person who calls you to let you know that something's, coming down the pipeline. So building up that network is really important.
And so you said something really important earlier that was you need to know your goals. And is this something that you encounter? I mean, you've learned personally with your consulting clients, like if they know their goals, you can try to reach it or vice versa.
Yes, I think that I learned part of that. So I lobbied for several years, not for vacation rentals specifically, for just a very diverse group of small business interests. But I think that overall understanding that process of goals. So I like to always say with a client, what you need to know immediately: what are your non-negotiables? What are you willing to compromise? And then we start out at something higher and then maybe move towards a little bit closer of what that compromise is. But you also need to understand what those non-negotiables are. And this is speaking more specifically to legislation, to ordinances, to something that they're looking forward to. But yeah, that goal, and with fundraising as well, until you can kind of hit that goal of fundraising, you can't, you know achieve what other special projects. So it's a learning process. It's also a very diverse learning process, since the industry's changed so much. So and also regionally, like our goals in Florida are going to be very different than our goals in California, right? It's just it's a much stricter environment in California. The process is a little bit different. So you have to really understand and work with that community. And as a consultant, for more so that, on the industry side of it, you really have to look at it and lead more towards to the people who are in the community, and what their operation structure is. What are those changes or those compromises or those goals, and how does that affect their day-to-day operations? And that's something they really have to look at. And I've learned a little bit more nuance of that through, different clients in this process.
People will hire you to help them achieve their short term rental advocacy goals. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Or fundraising.
Or fundraising. And Tiffany, you are among the best fundraisers I have ever encountered. My favorite quote after being at a fundraising party at your house with delicious wine was, you came out and you so eloquently stated that if you've ever been to a event at our house before, you know you need to donate money. And it was just such a wonderful balance of humor and truth, and everybody donated money. So that's kind of like your specialty, would you say?
I would say so. And I think part of it is that I don't take on projects unless I truly believe in it. And one of the most important parts of fundraising, and for anyone out there who's planning on fundraising, is that you also have to put your money where, or your mouth where your money is. So I have to, support a lot of the endeavors that I'm willing to go out there and fundraise for, because I have to show that I'm a good steward of those funds, or, I have just as much to lose or to gain by participating in that. But yes, I do. most of my friends, even my friends here in the local community, know that if they're coming over to their house, there may be at some point after a couple glasses of wine where I ask for some type of
I
funds.
gotta start doing that at my house. People are just over every night eating my stash. Um,
Yeah.
there's this, like, to peel back the layer even further, I think there's an even more pointed activity that you help me understand, and that is educating these lawmakers beyond just building a relationship with them, but educating them on the differences between local vacation rental professionals, the people that we work with, and other, which I'll just put in quotes. Can you elaborate on why you think that's such a pound for pound worthwhile activity?
Most managers, property owners, homeowners who are involved in the day-to-day operations will be able to tell you that their most of their concerns that come within a community are based on individuals who do not play by the rules. They're either not paying taxes, they're not following, the trash, the noise, the parking. So there's definitely a divide of those who operate professionally or operate under the same rules, or and there's those that don't. And so it's really important to differentiate what it is that you do in your policies and procedures. As an industry, we have gotten so um, blindsided. We stay within our tiny, our industry, and we're so busy a lot of times comparing um, each other, right? Or different practices within the community of, different players or what's going on nationally. And we don't do a really great job of explaining exactly what we do outside of our
Mhm.
industry. For example, a lot of people don't understand that we have, some people may have brick and mortar, some people may still have, check-ins, some people may be sending out a good neighbor policy and having signatures before someone comes in. A lot of elected officials are not a part of their industry, and most that we find when we've done different or reach outs to different elected officials, they've all stayed in a vacation rental, but they call it an Airbnb or they call it a Verbo, right? They don't know that they're actually staying with a company somewhere. And so while that's great, we're not connecting necessarily that we're part of the community. And a lot of people see it as property management and they can't differentiate if it's a short term rental, if it's a long term rental. So all they see is the negativity. And that's a lot of times for people who have been in the community for long standing periods of time. They just don't take the time to meet these elected officials. And so it is really important because as an elected official, they're spending so much time on the big issues, right? Healthcare, transportation, what the budget is. And we don't do a really great job of saying, hey, we're 97% of the sales tax provided in the area because of the tourism we provide, or we've been here for this long, or our employees are here and they go to your school and they're also concerned about this. We just don't communicate those items.
And it's because most of us are busy actually doing the craft. That's a whole different skill set of telling your story and promoting it. Share the response that you got when you finally successfully conveyed the difference between what we do and Airbnb post COVID. What was the response from legislators?
Yeah, it was extremely surprising. So, most legislators just believed that it was more of a listing site, that we didn't have checks and balances, that most of us don't care about the local community or even based in a local community. There's a narrative that's out there now that we're all, get rich quick and there's so much money that's being flooded into, and that we don't care about the actual assets of the homes or the neighborhoods. And so having these discussions with elected officials was really important because it was showing that we were a community partner and that we do agree with with some regulation, right? I certainly, and we've had this discussion before, I agree with some regulation. I think there should be some checks and balances. I mean, we are allowing people into these homes, and there should be some health and safety that go along with that. um, we've had this discussion before, but a lot of people don't understand. I mean, I sat down with a state senator and a very important area in Florida, and she thinks that this industry is just about, or she's having issues with plastic surgeons who are not board certified, and they're renting out homes, and very large homes, and they're renting out each room, and those are where they're performing surgeries and then doing the recovery. And so that's what she thinks is synonymous with vacation rentals. And so we had to sit down, or short-term rentals, we had to sit down and talk about why that is not the case. And so, you just don't know what necessarily the narrative is that's out there, but it's overwhelmingly a lot of people don't understand. And then on the other side is that they may understand, but they may have a vacation rental in their neighborhood that they just can't get control over. So explaining kind of, those processes are very important. And that's how we were able to, get back open, stay open, during, or after that pandemic. So.
And doing a better job of communicating ourselves, our craft, to lawmakers is one end of the spectrum. The other end is looking inwards and saying, making sure that everybody's doing their part. I think we have something of an accountability crisis in that not everybody is contributing their part. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree.
Okay, so I'm curious, and folks, Tiffany has not been primed with any questions before this
I'm
interview.
a little nervous now.
I'm curious, Tiffany, who do you think should be contributing more of their fair share? And you're not allowed to say everyone. Property owners, property managers, vendors in the space, or OTAs?
I'd also like to add in
Yeah,
homeowners.
property owners, homeowners.
So if a property owner manages a home, they think that just their management percentage is enough, and that's not. I mean, they have one of their largest assets. They should be more involved.
Property owner managers. Okay, got it.
Correct. So not just a property, self-managed, but those that are on a rental program
Okay.
should be much more involved. Um, I think that I would definitely say that in my experience, vendors have stepped up to the plate in such a big way in the last couple of years. We have seen that through the advocacy fund at VRMA. I've been blown away by the generosity and support for this
You
industry.
want to give any shout outs?
Oh gosh, there's so many I'd love to give out, but I will say that the very first person I ever called on this, and this was before I had any ROI ever, and this was probably like 5 or 6 years ago, was Laird Sager at Red Sky. I had nothing to show for what we were gonna do, but I knew that we needed some money in Florida and for some, preemption stuff. And he, without a doubt, said absolutely, and he really got no recognition for that 5 or 6 years ago. And I will say that that was huge. Obviously, I will also say Steve, Milo is, but he's obviously not a vendor property manager, but um, I don't want to go into too many more. I would say that if anyone wants to look at the donor list on VRMA, please go look, because they are, they're giving and they're not really getting a whole lot back. They're just supporting all of our property managers.
But one could make the argument that those vendors have more to lose.
They do, but they only get a certain marketing budget, right? So at the end of the day, a lot of people don't see the value, and this goes not only for vendors, but it goes for property managers, it goes for, OTAs. It's very different because you're only given so much money in a budget, and no one really budgets government affairs.
Hmm.
OTAs do. OTAs do, but they have their own agendas that they have to set out. And what we've done for so long is allow them to be the voice for our industry and the policies, because they have a governmental affairs budget. But vendors, suppliers, property managers typically do not have a governmental affairs budget. They have a limited budget. They like to see it in marketing, because guess what? The homeowners have been promised a certain amount. They've got Google ads to spend on. We have software that's expensive. I mean, we have employees now that, you have to add in more, whether you're contract or not. So that budget gets smaller and smaller. And because you don't necessarily see the ROI, or there's fatigue, a lot of people only really give when there's an issue or when there's a major surplus. And someone like me is banging down the door consistently for money.
All right. Well, shout out to all the amazing vendors. Who do you think should be contributing more of their fair share than they currently are?
That's a really hard one. Yeah. So that was your question. I tried to avoid that a little bit, but thanks for bringing it back. So I'm not as quite as politically savvy as I once thought. I would say there I have again, I've been very overwhelmed by a lot of the larger property managers, but property managers definitely need to step up, in my opinion. And that's, there's so many times that I call and it's not necessarily even just for funds, but it's for resources. It's, can you help mentor another group? Can you and I understand everyone gets fatigued but I do think that we need to step up, but I also think we need to step up as a cohesive voice. There's a lot of times where you have someone in a particular area that wants to lead the charge, but they don't necessarily do it with, humility and grace, which, you know, tends to hurt our narrative. And so I think we need to be working together, and definitely stay. It's not something that has an issue and then goes away. Property managers are very vested, and honestly, we're the ones who get the bad rap. So we have to educate a little bit more. And so I don't think that's necessarily just as much money. I think that's more education, and resources and networking. OTAs are going to be different, right? I mean, because I see it as more as property managers, the place that we're at right now is because we didn't step up 10 years ago. We've relied other people to be our voice.
And you and your husband Ben are vacation rental owners and property managers, so you put yourself in that category.
We do. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like something interesting happens when you suddenly realize that because we haven't achieved a certain uh, threshold of defining exactly who we are and how we are educating people on that, stepping up and doing all this really hard stuff, not trying to play down the enormity of the challenge. But when we realize that we have lacked on this front for a while, it suddenly gets clearer the next steps. And I think it is worth also sharing that OTAs are very involved in the discussion, but OTAs are involved in the discussion for their own bottom lines, which is oftentimes an agenda that's different than the independent property managers or than the vendors who are supplying these operators, right? It's not that they're not involved, but it's not necessarily a direct reflection of the needs of the operators.
Absolutely. And I will say too that, we all have to be coming together. One of the biggest issues that we see with elected officials is almost in every state and location is that there are so many fragments of this industry and we are not in a cohesive voice. And again, property managers haven't been strong enough to lead of who they are. Um but and VRMA is doing a really great job of defining what professional is and having that unique and honest conversation where we can lead it out from the front, and property managers can then fill in the buckets of tax paying, local, consistent, and high standards. But I, OTAs is also, they're a business, and you have to understand that they also have to follow through with what their information is, and what their bottom line is, and their ultimate goals. That's not to say that we can't work hand in hand, but I think that as property managers, we also have to understand that our operations and how we, what we're going to have to do with our property managers. So, for example, maximum occupancy becomes an issue all the time, right? And I always say it's kind of a low hanging fruit because it becomes, somewhat of a marketing regulations, but it's something that we can compromise on. We can understand that as property managers. Um, we have to one understand what that compromise is, but like OTAs aren't really going to care about that. Now, when we have to go in and start listing out who is what, or property managers have to start regulating that and enforcing that internally and like knocking on doors and checking heads. I mean, these are operation issues, right? So we don't want all of that on our people who work day to day, but we have to understand that. And we have to understand what we're willing to fight for, because those are going to be a little bit different in nuance than, say what an OTA wants. And the goal is to compromise more so, I think, than kill something if you don't have to kill something.
And now a word from our sponsors. Point Central provides smart property solutions for smart vacation property managers. They help streamline operations, protect the property, and enhance the guest experience using keyless access. Why? Because guests are tired after traveling, duh. And being able to go directly to that property with keyless access instead of stopping at a manager's office, this is no longer a luxury. This is a standard practice. Plus, everybody loves avoiding extra trips due to lost keys, not to mention the constant cost of rekeying. Point Central partners stay aware with an activity log of who enters and leaves the property, which helps keep track of cleaning and maintenance crews as well. You can also gain control of your utility bills with their smart thermostats. Schedule set points so guests won't be able to drastically raise or lower the temperatures, for instance. You can ensure the temperature stays consistent when the unit is vacant. Prevent costly maintenance projects caused by water leaks, mold, or HVAC issues with real-time alerts that allow you to be proactive. Visit pointcentral.com/VRMB to learn more. And Breezeway, whose property care and operations platform helps you coordinate, communicate, and verify the detailed work and deliver the best service experience to your guests. With tools for intelligent task scheduling, quality assurance, real-time work coordination, guest messaging, supplies management, owner reporting, and more, oh my. Breezeway helps thousands of short-term rental managers and hospitality operators increase your operational efficiency and eliminate hours of manual work. This allows you to boost your service revenue. It was created by the founding team of FlipKey, which was since acquired by TripAdvisor, and Breezeway is just elevating the experience at every property they touch. Visit breezeway.io/VRMB and get implementation fees waived. That's a $1,000 value right there. Okay, let's get back to the show. I was introduced to a mayor named Jerry. I just like that his name is Mayor Jerry. That's how I've got him in my phone, of Paradise Valley. And he said, the next time you're in town, would love to meet for coffee. And I went and met for coffee. And first of all, Mayor Jerry was doing exactly what you said. He thought of Airbnb as the industry. He called them the industry. I was like, how rude. He's like, no, that they're the industry. They make up all of the problems. I was like, suddenly realized that we had a problem because we've allowed that to happen. But he said he had been listening to our podcast with Dana, the How to Save Your Vacation Rental Business podcast, which, by the way, coming out season 3 in about a week and a half. He said he had been listening to the podcast and he enjoyed our objective take on things. And he learned that it was not only Airbnb that represented the industry, that there was, in fact, a professional side. And suddenly we start having this sort of open dialogue, and we start realizing we have more in common than we do apart. In fact, he despises some of these efforts almost as much as I do. And I think Paradise Valley is kind of famous for having very strict short-term rental laws, and him for being very strong-minded. But he also said, I'm an investor myself. I try to take into all these viewpoints into consideration. And I think he would argue that meeting with an advocate like myself started to change his way of thinking, and the education was really helping him make better decisions. And we ended up more than coffee. We went out on a little road trip together. How about that? There's a way.
There certainly is a way. And I think that, if I could impart on anyone, that if you can help, because you helped come up with a solution for him as well, which I think is really important that people understand, is that, they're getting elected officials and their staff are usually getting, I mean, 10 times as much, inbox in their day on an issue as it relates to vacation rentals. I mean, I met with a city council member who was from one individual was getting like 12 texts and pictures a day of some parking and trash issues, right? And so at some point they're just over it and they don't care. But if you can educate, again, what you would do and bring them a solution, that's the thing. A lot of times they don't even know where to go. So it's easiest to help answer the loudest person in the room, to just get them, away, to solve a problem and move on to the next, because they're looking at a docket that is very diverse. So if you can come in with, with some solutions, talk about what are the things that you do, they'll technically, or a lot of times, be a lot more open. And the other part is that when there is some type of, city council meeting, or there is an issue at hand, or there is someone who is, anti against, try to go meet with them. Some of them you can't, some of them there's no way you're ever going to change your mind, and that's fine. You can.
Like they might kill you or something.
Yeah, they like they're picketing outside of your office, like, it's not gonna change. They have the "Bring our neighbors back" signs, and, in their front yard, whatever it is, but there are some people who are just frustrated, and they have a different, they've been impacted, and their standard of living has been impacted, and so you just have to start having some of those conversations.
Yeah, for sure. Um, in that conversation with Mayor Jerry, I just started calling him Jerry now that we're close. He said, one of my baseline requirements would be I would love to have every property every guest be vetted somehow. And I said, that's not unrealistic. And he also mentioned a noise device. I said, that's not so unrealistic. In fact, I just met a company at the conference here called Guest Ranger, which does guest vetting. Would you like to chat with him? He's like, what? There's a tool that does that? And I said, yes. It surprised me. I didn't even know it existed. And apparently now those two are having conversations, but it was merely a matter of proximity, getting close, having the discussions. Um, Based on your time in our industry, what frustrates you the most about the progress that we haven't made? And then I'm going to flip side and go on to what you're really proud of.
Oh gosh, I get very frustrated that we haven't identified enough with a strong voice of who we are. And that means as a full industry, continuing to have these conversations with elected officials, and we've met with some of the highest ups, and them not understanding who we are is extremely frustrating. I think that having people not being willing to come to the table, and rely on other people, and that's not to say some people don't get burnt out and have led the torch for a very long time, but there are some people who are within a community. I mean, I personally have had an elected official here that he specifically asked, and will potentially become a speaker. He specifically asked to meet with property managers to understand more about the industry, because he did not know. And I had like 3 property managers show up, and I probably asked 20,
Ouch.
and hand selected. I mean, that's a lost opportunity. He's reaching out to understand more about what it is that we do. Um, that those parts get really frustrating. I think also frustrating is when we can't agree, when things get, you get really far down the line about it, making compromises, whether it's an ordinance or legislation, and you find out later that others in the industry, hurt that, prevent that, stop that. That's really disheartening.
It's demoralizing.
It is, because I look at it, and we've had this conversation, but because I was born and raised in this industry, because my husband and I have, vacation rental companies, because my mom is still up there, my brother's still up there, my grandfather, until the day he, died, worked for, our family business. This means something to us. I know what it's like when legislation and ordinances come knocking at your door, and you don't know if you're going to stay in business. So it's very personal to me. So when you go in and you spend a lot of time and money, and you know how much it'll affect these small business owners, and you have people in the industry who are not willing to compromise or negotiate, that is very disheartening.
Whenever I tell people outside of our industry about these types of incidents, their like mind is blown. They're like, "Wait a minute, you're telling me you're a tiny cottage in little industry that like prides itself on community and all these similar things, and yet you guys like argue and can't agree on things to the point that it's harming your progress." They just can't get over that.
Well, I can tell you from lobbying for a couple years and then also working with lobbyists in, several different states, it's very rare within
Oh,
industries
really?
to not.
We are unique in this
Yes.
sense?
We're unique. I mean, there are some associations and some industries, right, that, may have some disagreements on, legislation and that, but we're definitely diverse in terms of all going in different directions.
That's one word for it. What about the flip side? What are you most proud of in terms of the progress that we've made? And I'll kick it off by asking, what inning of this ball game do you think we are in?
Does it ever end? It's like the 12th. um, let's see. Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's never ending. I will say that I'm a lot more positive and happy in the progress, and I will that now. I mean, and I think we have also had this discussion that so when I first came into VRMA, and my mom was one of the first like VRMA members back in the 1980s. So I've slowly been a part of conferences and that. But when I joined with Ben or joined when Ben and I got married and I started coming a little bit more
You joined the
frequently,
Ben Club?
joined hand, joined the Ben Edwards Club. Yeah, he the I learned that there wasn't really any governmental affairs department. I mean, this was back before, I mean, gosh, it was 12 years ago, maybe 13 years ago. There was no governmental affairs department. And that was how, it just blew my mind, that we didn't have a little bit more education on that. So, and then when I first came in and I think even started talking about government affairs, the session would have like two people. um Sometimes you'll still have two people, right, Matt?
Yeah.
But, but mostly people are asking for it at VRMA Spring Forum. It was opening session. I mean, we were covered with people to listen in and hear what's going on. And I think that's huge. I think suppliers getting involved, over the last couple of years because they understand the depth of it is really important. Property managers now, larger companies have governmental affairs departments. I mean, you're seeing like Avant Stay, Vacasa, V Trips. They all have governmental affairs departments, and they're making it a very large part of their budget. You know, that's a huge win. And they're all coming together in a similar room, with VRMA and that, and we're pushing forward a similar narrative and advocating and lobbying for ourselves. So I think that's a huge win. Funds behind it, the PACs that have been started. I know that's been a very large component because unfortunately you have got to help support candidates campaigning, and getting people who support you elected is very important, and a lot of that has to do with PACs. So I would say all of those are really big wins, and personally, I've been completely honored to be a part of that fundraising component, and then making sure that we have consistent studies and data available, and getting them in the right hands of elected officials.
I would like to add to that something that I actually learned from you. And it's that we need to make it fun and we need to celebrate it in memorable ways. And I think your work, like that fundraiser that I mentioned at your house, um, it makes for like a benchmark of progress that we are not completely depressed all the time. We can actually like celebrate that we accomplished something, or that we're making some progress, or that a new company showed up. In fact, I remember that at that event, um, Eric, who was at the time with Inhabit, Eric Broughton, yeah, who
Hmm.
helped create the right to rent concept. I remember
Yes.
I saw him on the phone in the bushes at the actual like donations portion of the evening. And he got off the phone and he went up and he wrote like a huge check. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, 50,000 I think was
50
that night.
grand. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I asked him afterwards. In fact, I think I asked him this on our podcast interview. I asked him who was on the phone there and what case were you making? And he said that it was his boss who approves these types of things. And the case that I was making was, if we don't do this, our bottom line erodes. And I was like, huh, that's a pretty straightforward way of phrasing it. And then he went up and he was kind of like the hero of the evening in a way. And we all got to celebrate it, whether he contributed that amount or not. It was a really fun evening. And I think that's become your hedgehog, is making this kind of work fun.
I appreciate you saying that. That is a very important part of it. We have such a, I've talked about being it fragmented as it is. I've always looked at our industry as co-opetition. And granted, I've been around it for a very long time, but if you're in an area that and work in an area where there's another provider that's been there for a very long time, go speak to them. A lot of them would love to give you like talk to you, meet with you. There's a very it's not competition, it is co-opetition, right? Like it's and building up these fun events. It's we're all wanting the same goal. We're all fighting for the same thing, and you have to make it fun. I think that night our big thing was like if we had set such a low goal, but if we had hit something, we opened, a 1985 bottle of wine. You always have to have something that's like, okay, if you hit this, we can do XYZ, right? But yeah, that was, you've got to bring people together. It's got to be fun. You've got to bring people together and they have to understand what it is that you're raising funds for and believe in it. And all of those individuals have continued to support the VRMA Advocacy Fund after that night. We've all worked together, so it's a very important component. And we work so hard. Why not throw a little party in every once in a while?
Yeah, and I think advocacy is the perfect final layer to this passion story, right? Like we oftentimes say that the best managers, the best operators are positioned the best because they're passionate about it. Whatever however that manifests itself, that passion gets them through the harder times. It has increased their lead on competition through adversity. And the advocacy is really saving what you love if you step back, right? If you don't do this, then what you love becomes no more.
Yeah, and it's saving whoever works for you
Mm-hmm.
their opportunity to pursue what it is they love or put food on their table. I mean, it's it's a lot more impactful than I think people give it credit for.
And Tiffany, I think we dropped some hints in this conversation, but I've had the chance to get to know you over the last year or so because you play a central role in the first ever episode of Home Runners, which is our new docu-series, which goes behind the scenes, some of the world's leading vacation rental professionals, to learn how the memories are made. In fact, that was what brought me to your house for that wine moment, that fundraiser, which we have on film, which will be featured. You want to share the big news? Or you want me to?
No, I'll let you share the big
Okay.
news.
So it's going to be featured on
Mhm.
Netflix. No, just kidding. It's going to be featured.
Hey, put it out there. Put it out
Well,
there.
it will be featured formally, officially, at the VRMA International Conference on October 23rd in Las Vegas at Caesar's Palace. We're having fun. We're making a big event out of it. Some people will be wearing their tuxedos. Other people will be coming as their vacation rental alter ego costume. And some people will just be coming dressed as is. But you have seen the episode. So I'm wondering if you can give anybody a little teaser who might be on the fence about RSVPing for this free event.
You definitely need to show up. F I've seen the episode a couple of times. You're gracious to say it's central role, but I am not. Very small, but really to talk a little bit more so about the advocacy component. But I think you know, getting together at some of these conferences, like I said before, or even meeting with people at support group, it's nice to see on camera that there's such a personalized aspect to the things that we do, and that other people have to, you know, do the same things of the ins and outs of the business, right? You're not alone in this. So it's a really brilliant way of putting it on the screen, and showcasing it what it is that we do, um, and a really, and again, in a fun way. So I would once definitely say, come and watch. You're going to do some interviews with some of the individuals, which I think is going to be really impactful to see. And then the other part too is, like, of course we're going to be doing a little bit of fundraising, but we'll be giving away some really cool swag. So if anything else, right, that's, come on.
Yes, and the really cool swag. I think we should just tell people some elements because that will really push them over the edge. We've got a really cool limited edition backpack that was put together by Track, which is one of the sponsors of the event, and featured in the film itself. And the backpack is very limited edition. It's themed, let's just say that much. And we're also going to have some of your wine featured, right? Share very briefly your wine genius project that very few people know about.
So I also am involved with an organization here in Destin called the Destin Charity Wine Auction Foundation. And we support 14 local children's charities. Ben and I've been a long supporter. My mom got us into it a long time ago. And so we do a lot of wine events here at the house, and all the funds go and support the kids in our area. And so we've developed these really great relationships with different vineyards and vintners over in Napa. And so we'll be having some Napa wine in all of the not all of our swag bags, but on the giveaway swag bags. So I think there's 20 or so of them. And so there'll be some surprise Napa vintages there in the bags.
And I think that's just a wonderful microcosm, Tiffany, of what makes you so great. You brought in the two things that you love, vacation rentals and wine, together,
Wine.
and everybody gets to enjoy them, and everybody gets to have fun. This is a good thing. So we'll provide the RSVP link in the show notes. That's October 23rd. Anybody can attend. You can see Tiffany, and you can even see the scene that features Tiffany's husband Ben. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
You proud of that scene?
I am proud of that scene. I'm proud that, Ben's so great that he rarely ever says no. We probably have some type of fundraising event at the house at least once a month. And he never says no to them. I mean, he is just as philanthropic on efforts, and he's not usually out there in front. So in this, you'll see him over to the side, but and he's, much more of the day-to-day operations with our vacation rental companies. But yeah, but he never says no. So that's also important too, that if you're willing to go out and fundraise and ask people for money, find someone who supports you, because your friends will whittle down after a while.
And for those who will be in attendance, that scene is towards the end. It's the wine fundraiser scene. You can featured Ben Edwards front and center. There's also another character sort of in the background of that scene, another vacation rental manager, a gigantic vacation rental manager who's just kind of creeping
Yeah.
in the back. He looks like he's about to steal something. So we'll leave that part open ended for our guests. And Tiffany, any final thoughts as we move into maybe the most important year of vacation rentals ever?
Yeah, I would just say, don't ever be intimidated to get involved on the advocacy front. Whether it's, if maybe asking for money is not your thing, or if you're intimidated to call up an elected official, don't. You are the most educated individual on this process, and people will want to hear from you. So don't ever be afraid to send an email, to call up to an office, to meet with a staff member. introduce yourself. Again, if asking for money is not your thing, maybe send something else, out to homeowners and try to help, drum up some money if you have an advocacy effort. But don't ever be afraid, because it's much easier than you think, to try to encourage people to get involved.
It's easier than you think to get people involved. I think this is an important note to end on, because I've always held the exact opposite belief, that it's actually way harder to get people involved in advocacy efforts than you could ever imagine. But I've also viewed this from a ground up perspective. That's where I've done the majority of my work. And I still maintain it, that it is really hard to get other property owners and managers engaged in your battle. The soul of vacation rental hospitality is at stake. Why aren't more people helping? But this is also why I appreciate Tiffany so much, because she actually holds exactly the opposite lesson coming from her vantage point, which is admittedly polar opposite to mine, working with lawmakers. So I think herein lies the big unlock of this episode. Getting a fair outcome for your craft over time requires systems thinking. You do not operate individually on an island. You're part of a complex system. And if you want favorable change, you need to see the big picture. You need to see all viewpoints, including those who at first you may not agree with. Tiffany is also just fun. We can all use a little more fun in our lives. So if you want to meet her and me, we'll be at the Home Runners World Premiere, and you can use the RSVP link in the show notes. October 23rd, the kickoff evening of VRMA International at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. We've added Tiffany's email address in the show notes as well. Tiffany once told me that Home Runners unites a fragmented industry together. And I liked it so much that I wrote it on my window. And if it resonates with you, uniting fragmented stakeholders together, using collective wisdom to solve these difficult problems, consider joining VRMB communities with more than 1,000 independent home runners quietly building our dream businesses on our own terms. You can join at vrmb.com/join. Until next time.